So this was a speech that Ed Miliband really needed to nail to demonstrate that he's a Prime Minister in waiting. And he did it in the usual way for politicians these days, in the round with an audience behind him. And I thought he coped pretty well. He didn't use a lectern or a podium, which I thought was a good move. It was an improvised speech, or at least allegedly improvised. Clearly a lot of it had been memorised, but he didn't give the text in advance to the reporters in the hall, which meant that they were paying close attention. And Jon Snow from Channel 4 tweeted during the speech that because there's no text, they're really having to listen to what he says rather than just note how he says it. So he used alliteration, the forgotten 50% of people who don't go to university, and he talked about the technological baccalaureate. He didn't really introduce any new policies, but he didn't have to, because I say his job was to convince people he was a Prime Minister in waiting. I thought it worked very well. There were several places where he was almost Obama-like in his oratory. He did a bit of call and response with the audience, where they were shouting no at people who didn't agree with the Tory plans to reorganise the National Health Service. NHS is, of course, a potent weapon as far as the Labour Party and its supporters are concerned. So I think he delivered very well. I think he demonstrated a lot about his own personal story, and it's true to say that focus groups in the Labour Party have found out that when he talks about his parents and his roots back in Poland, he gets a bit of a bounce in the polls anyway. So I think that was a shrewd move on his part. But most of all, this was the One Nation speech. He was going for the centre ground of British politics, talking about one nation, as opposed to what he called the elitism of the coalition government, particularly the Tories. And of course, he criticised Andrew Mitchell for calling the police plebs, allegedly. He also talked about the way in which Cameron was cozying up to the bankers, and he positioned the coalition government somewhat to the right and claimed the centre ground for the Labour Party. But other than the politics of it, I thought it was a well-delivered speech. I thought he did very, very well to speak for about 45-50 minutes without notes. There were some stumbles, of course, but you would expect that in a speech delivered in that way. He wasn't using auto-cue, that was clear. And I think he created like a strong bond. He almost had a couple of funny lines. Politicians aren't great at doing jokes, but his jokes weren't too bad. He clearly went down very well in the hall, and I think there were some excellent sound bites. There was one great example of a rising list, a rising cadence, what is known as a claptrap, what Max Atkinson, the great speech coach, would call a claptrap. So he delivered that very well. And his closing phrase, of course, was about One Nation Britain and rebuilding Britain, which is clearly going to be the slogan of the Labour Party up to the next election. So overall, I think Ed Miliband did a good job. I think it's his best speech so far as Labour leader, and I'd give him 8 out of 10.